It is so good to have you here with us. And the performance is going to be the Marketer's Toolkit Prepare for 2025. I'm going to leave you in best hands.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Aditya Kishore. I'm the Insight Director at WARC. Some of you may be familiar with WARC. We are a company that focuses on marketing effectiveness. We try to provide tools to marketers to make their work more effective. I'm here to talk about a study that we just launched a couple of weeks ago. So this is actually the first time I'm actually presenting it to a large audience. So please excuse any errors and omissions. I think we've seen some really brilliant creative over the course of the last day and a half. Some really, really interesting ideas. This is going to be a little bit different. So I hope you've had your Americanos this morning, because we're going to be focusing a lot on effectiveness. So there's a fair bit of data, some charts, not a lot of brilliant creative, I'm afraid. But I think it's quite important to take a sort of bigger picture view of marketing and understand kind of how marketing is impacted by change. And that's really what the Marketer's Toolkit does. We produce this report every year. We've been doing it for 14 years. This is the 14th edition. The purpose of the report is really to look ahead. So we do this study that looks at emerging trends, disruption that we think is coming in the next year, so in 2025. We identify 5 key trends. So every year it's 5 trends that we think are going to sort of cause disruption for marketers or cause change for marketers. Typically, we don't look at things that we consider always on. So, brand, performance, frequency, reach, these are not things that we tend to focus on. We look at things that have been kind of bubbling under the surface maybe a little bit and are starting to take off, or something new that is going to change things for marketers, or even opportunities that they might not have noticed. So it's those little missing bits that won't necessarily make it into a marketing plan, but could be really important in the coming year. So those are the things that we try and focus on. How do we identify these trends? It's quite a lengthy process. It takes several months. So we start off using a tool called Geist, which has 6 different lenses. So we look at a macro level outside of the marketing industry entirely. We look at what we think are going to be the big global shifts in the coming year across all of these 6 lenses. And then when we've identified a set of those shifts, we go through a sort of trend development process where we then sit down with a team of global experts and we challenge each of those and try to understand what are the implications for marketers. We take regional input, specific areas and topic expertise, and we put that all together over a series of workshops. And we identify what those major themes will be. We then go out and validate them through a survey of 1,000+ people. We have conversations with CMOs and marketing leaders, kind of in-depth discussions on those topics. And then, of course, we look at what's being used on WARC itself. What are the questions clients asking? What are they reading? This year, for the first time, we also used AI to try and identify the biggest trends. And then we kind of consolidate those into 5 key trends. We do a whole bunch of research to see what other evidence is out there on those topics from various sources. We pull that all together, and we create this study. So that gives us those 5 trends. As I said, it's quite a lengthy process. But what are those trends? Let's have a look at the first one. And the first big trend that we see is what we call capitalizing on the economic reset. Now, the main issue here is that we're starting to see a little bit more stability in the overall economic picture. It's not great. We're not anticipating very rapid growth. But over the last few years, we've had COVID, lockdowns, the war in Ukraine, Gaza, very high inflation, interest rates going up. It's been a ride for most marketers. And what we're hoping for this year is that things settle down a little bit. We think inflation is sort of stabilizing. Well, we hope inflation is stabilizing. There are some downside risks. There's obviously geopolitical issues that continue to exist. There's potentially President Trump is talking about some very radical tariffs that could have impacts on the world. But generally, the assessment seems to be quite positive. This is a map from the IMF looking at inflation. And as you can see, most of the big economies are kind of in a nice shade of calm green, which means low inflation. Some of the emerging economies are kind of a light orange, which is typical. Generally, emerging economies have slightly higher inflation. But overall, the picture looks pretty good. And so hopefully we'll start to see interest rates come down and consumers will have, be able to buy houses, have easier mortgage issues, a little more money in the pocket. All of those things will start to kind of improve. Marketers are generally optimistic. So the marketers that we surveyed, this is again 1,000+ marketers, 2 out of 3, 65%, think that 2025 will be better than 2024. So they're optimistic about the coming year. You'll see Europe's a little bit lower, unfortunately, but still 6 out of 10 European marketers believe that 2025 is going to be better than 2024. Our own forecasts are generally fairly positive. We're looking at about 10.5% growth in 2024 in advertising investment. We're also anticipating about 7+%, 7.2% next year, and we'll exceed $1 trillion in advertising spend in the coming year. So overall picture is quite positive. But there are some pretty serious concerns. So we asked marketers, how concerned are you about white label goods, non-branded goods, discounted goods eating into your market share? And as you can see, about 25% said to a very significant extent. Another 39% said to a moderate extent. So there are very real concerns about price and consumers' ability to pay. And one of the challenges around that, of course, is the fact that even if inflation stabilizes, that is the rate of growth of price increases. It's not that prices are coming down. So price is going to be a very important issue moving forward. And it continues to be something that marketers need to look at. But given the relative stability, there's a possibility for marketers to be a little more proactive in 2025 and take a little more control over this. So I think the big question we kind of come to as a result of that is, what's the sort of interaction between a brand and brand building and brand investment, pricing, and potentially profitability? The interesting link between price and profitability is, McKinsey did some research, and they found that if you are able to raise your price by 1%, and maintain your sales volume, so you don't lose sales, your profitability goes up by 8%, 8 times. So price is really integral and quite tied to profitability. Just want to be clear here, we're not suggesting people should raise prices. That's not the strategy, and it's very unlikely for most products that you'll be able to raise price and not have an impact on sales. That's almost certainly going to happen. What we're sort of looking at is, how can you increase profitability in situations where you are faced by discounting or by competitors who are discounting? How can you maintain price or raise price minimally and maximize profitability? That connection between price and profitability becomes really important. But how can you do that? How can you decrease price sensitivity amongst your customers? How can you decrease price elasticity so that if you have to raise prices, you're not seeing as big an impact on sales? There's some great research from Magic Numbers that talks about this, and what they found was that brands, if a brand increases their price by 1%, the key element of how that impacts their sales is to do with how much advertising they've spent on. So if you've spent a lot on brand advertising, if you've really built a strong brand, and you have to raise prices, the impact on your sales is much less. If you haven't spent that money, if you haven't invested in building a really differentiated, powerful brand, the impact on your sales will be much more. So there's a pretty clear correlation between how much you spend on your brand, how strong your brand is, the price you can charge for that brand, and how profitable you are, or the scale of profitability. So there's this direct kind of correlation between these 3 elements. And so the key message to marketers is, get more involved with pricing and use brand investment. You can justify brand investment by linking it to profitability. That becomes a useful tool in those arguments internally. And we've seen evidence of that in the real world. So this campaign for McCain chips, they make frozen potato chips that you can put in an oven, heat up, and eat at home. This is a campaign run by Adam and Eve over 10 years. And they just won the IPA Effectiveness Grand Prix. So they're the winners. There's a lot of buzz, a lot of talk around this campaign, because they've been running it for 10 years. 10 years ago, McCain found that they were discounting their product. They were under threat from lower price generic products. They were really struggling to kind of build their business. And they kept losing market share. So from their point of view, they were like, what can we do? They chose to take a step back and say, we're really going to invest in our brand. We're going to really differentiate what we do from others. And they came up with this campaign that looked at family meal times. It was a little, real world, so not neat, blow-dried hair. Houses were a little untidy. Things were more realistic. And they really connected with their customers. And so as you can see from these orange bars, they've been coming down pretty steadily over those 10 years. And that's the sensitivity to pricing. So they've basically decreased their price elasticity because they've been able to invest in their brand. So it's a really powerful case study. I think if you're interested in having a look, it's on WARC, if you're a WARC subscriber, but there's also a lot of information on it around. But it sort of proves that correlation between price, brand, and also profitability. The sort of key way for brands to move forward now is to really focus on customer insights. The key to success for marketers within their own organization is to become the voice of the customer. So again, over the last few years, marketers have started to focus a lot more just on promotion. In marketing, we talk about the 4 Ps of marketing, right? Price, product, place, and promotion. And they've been focused very much on the last one because they're responding to crises. This sort of economic reset allows for the possibility to say, okay, let's regain control and influence over the 4 Ps. So it's okay to talk about pricing and brand, but you have to have an input into those conversations. And product is always going to be a piece of that. Place or distribution is going to be a piece of that. So in order to have that credibility internally, you need to really start to reclaim your role as the voice of the customer. Marketers need to double down on customer insight, really start to understand what's driving customer decisions. Some of you may recognize this gentleman. His name is Mark Ritson. He's a writer, educator, consultant, talks a lot about marketing. And one of the key things he says is that marketers shouldn't start with tactics. They shouldn't start with strategy. They should start with understanding the customer because they can do that better than anybody else in the organization. That's a guy called Mark Pritchard. He's a chief brand officer at P&G, oversees one of, if not the largest, advertising budgets in the world. And he says essentially the same thing. He says, our job is to deeply understand who we serve and what matters to them in their everyday lives. And these words, deeply understand and matters, are really interesting because you'll hear them again and again. This is Kate Yu. She's the CMO of Jollibee. Jollibee is in the Philippines. It's one of the few regional QSRs that has taken on the big international brands and won. And she says the first success lever is to, again, understand what matters to consumers deeply. That's Nthabi Matsueneng. She is the CMO of Pernod Ricard in Africa and Middle East, so a completely different region. And again, she talks to learn more from consumers to better understand them and serve them things that are natural to their world. So again and again, different parts of the world, a lot of marketing leaders are talking about this. And this guy as well, this is Ian Borden, who is the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. So he's not even a marketer. And he talks about how everything starts with an insight, that great ideas are rooted in that insight. And if you can then layer on strategy and creative excellence, then you've got that's what drives the most success, not only for the marketing campaign, but for the business as a whole. So these are things to think about in terms of, again, linking the 4 Ps, gaining more credibility within the market, and starting to focus on using brand as a lever for price and profitability. Let's move on to the second trend, which is actually very closely linked to the first. So we call this closing the experience gap, and this looks at the gap between what the brand is promising and the investment in the brand and what the customer experience is like, how customers are actually experiencing their interaction with the brand. Now, what we're seeing around the world is a pretty spectacular dip in customer service. So customers are less and less satisfied with the quality of customer care that they are getting. This is some data from Forrester from the US that shows that it's actually at an all-time low. Customer satisfaction with brand experience is at an all-time low. And that creates a risk of 3.7 trillion for brands because people can switch, move around, move to different brands, really starts to have an impact on the business. One of the things we've seen is that research shows that 60% of your perception of a brand, how you see a brand, is actually tied to your customer experience, much more so than advertising, marketing, promotion. This is an interesting stat. The blue line there is what CEOs at banks think is really important. So they're saying that customer centricity is very important for the brand. We have to be very focused on customers. And then the gray bars are all the lines of customers and whether they think their bank is actually focused on them. And you can see the difference from 91% to 31%. Have a look at that second last gray line. That's Polish customers. 8% of them think that their banks are focused on them, as opposed to 91% of CEOs who think that's really critical for the business. So you can see that there is a pretty big gap. And again, I'll come back to that. 60% of your perception of a brand is tied to your customer experience. There's a couple of things that marketers can look at. There's this idea of a promise to the customer. This is something that LinkedIn and a strategist called Roger Martin came up with, that sometimes communicating brand building, brand investment is kind of difficult outside of the marketing world. We all get it, but that's not necessarily how the rest of the organization sees it. And so start to think of it as a promise to the customer. So brands that make a clear promise to the customer, say that we will give you this and then deliver on it, that's essentially creating a strong brand. And not everybody does this. Not all advertising does it. Not all campaigns do it. So they advocated this as a really important approach. And it had to have three things. It had to be valuable to the customer. You have to promise them something that matters to them. It has to be something that stands out, that they can remember, that sticks in their heads, like all good advertising. And then lastly, it had to be 100% deliverable. You have to make sure that you can actually deliver on it. So WARC worked with LinkedIn and the B2B Institute to kind of evaluate that thinking across our database of case studies. So we took the case studies that we had and we split them into those that qualified on these three criteria as making a promise to the customer and those that didn't. And we found an interesting thing, that actually in terms of social buzz and PR and media, these campaigns underperformed others. So if you made a promise to the customer, you actually did worse in social media buzz. But in terms of brand health measures, you actually did considerably better. So making a promise to the customer creates less noise, but has far more impact. We also looked at some hard metrics, like excuse me. So we also looked at some hard metrics like gaining market share, getting new customers on board, and again, campaigns that had that promise to the customer, that fulfilled those three criteria we talked about, performed better. So that's a useful kind of idea for marketers to keep in mind. The two things that we would sort of warn marketers about is beware the Dorman fallacy. This is something that Rory Sutherland and a couple of other people have kind of talked about in advertising. And the concept here is that there was a point when you could get automatic doors for hotels. So the hotels started getting rid of their doorman because they were like, we don't need somebody to open the door. We have, a technology that can do that. But they found that actually doormen do a lot more than open the door. They greet guests. They're the face of the hotel. They have warmth and humanity. They help people get taxis. They help with bags. They give people directions, tell them what tourist sites to look at. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that doormen do that has nothing to do with the job that they're supposed to do. And that's an important thing to keep in mind within the context of what the IPA calls good friction. And that's basically, as a brand, you try to move people through the customer journey as quickly as you can. But there are times when you need to slow down, the times of good friction. There are touch points where it's actually quite good to slow the experience, add a bit of warmth, add a bit of humanity, and that helps the brand. So this is one thing that we would caution marketers. When you're looking at customer experience, be careful of the Dorman fallacy. Right, let's move on to trend number 3, and this is sort of shifting into the media world a little bit, so it's a bit different. And this really looks at the tension between brand safety, brands that are concerned about how they're showing up, and disinformation and hate speech, particularly in social media. So we found that 40% of advertisers in our survey thought that brand safety will have a significant impact in the coming year. So they're really quite concerned about it. And that number is actually up 10% over the last 3 years. So it's steadily risen as a matter of concern. But it's very difficult to move away from social media. So they're struggling to find that balance. Yes, there's a lot of hate speech, a lot of disinformation, and you don't want your brand showing up next to it. But what do you do? So we asked marketers what their thinking was around social media and investment in social media. And as you can see, 44%, so not much less than half, basically said, look, it's critical. We have to do it. We've got no choice. We're just going to do it. So roughly half are just going to spend. Another third are sort of looking at saying, okay, maybe we can be a little more careful. We can look at other options. But fundamentally, only 8%, that's 4 and 4 at the bottom, only 8% are either cutting social media spend or stepping away from social media. So no one is making any moves to really get away from social media, and you see that in the numbers. So we are forecasting a growth of 14% in social media spending next year. And of course, a lot of that is going to the big tech companies. 44% of that revenue will go to Alphabet, Meta, and Amazon. Now, the thing is, a lot of brands are looking at these companies to make changes, to cut down on disinformation, hate speech, better algorithms. But the reality is that's probably not going to happen. I mean, I know X and Elon Musk are a bit different. That's a category of their own. But Elon Musk basically sued the Alliance for Responsible Media, which was tasked with cutting down disinformation and hate speech. He just shut it down. And even Mark Zuckerberg has talked to Congress and said, actually, we kind of regret cutting down some of the disinformation during COVID. We probably wouldn't do that kind of censoring again. So I don't think the answers are sitting with the big tech companies. Some of them may take certain actions, some of them won't, some of them will care about certain things. But the solutions are elsewhere. And one of those interesting kind of areas is what Billy Ryan from the 7 Stars, another strategist, talks about the age of abundance. This is what's happening in media today, is that there are lots of new channels coming out. Retail media is particularly interesting. So you've got a bank like Chase, which is selling advertising. You've got an airline like United, which is selling advertising. You've got somebody like Walmart, which is a retail company in the US. And advertising is a third of their income suddenly, just in the last few years. So there's a lot of options opening up. And while we talk a lot about fragmentation of media, actually within complexity, there is choice. And that gives you a lot more options. There are new formats coming out in video, in television, streaming vendors are selling advertising. So there's a lot of new options opening up for marketers in terms of being able to reach customers in a safer and better way. But that creates a lot more complexity. And so what we need, what Dentsu calls the algorithmic planner. Folks that are used to AI, used to algorithms, more sophisticated in the way that they analyze data and find new opportunities. Also, a lot of the big platforms are creating their own AI tools and basically approaching brands and saying, look, leave it to us, we'll just sort it out. But they're essentially a black box for the brand. They have no idea what's actually happening. So you need algorithmic planners who can analyze that and figure out what that actually means. So we're going to see this kind of new generation of planners coming out who are comfortable with algorithms and comfortable with AI. So that's a big area for the market moving forward. Now, speaking of AI, there's another problem. AI is extremely processor intensive, and that means a lot of energy. So that has a significant impact on a lot of the environmental plans of businesses. So AI is not just power hungry, it just absolutely gobbles power, gobbles energy. So ChatGPT takes 10 times more energy than a regular search. Google has talked about their energy requirements going up by 48% because of AI. Meta, I think, has said something fairly similar. One AI image uses as much energy as charging a full charge for a smartphone, and it releases between 5 and 16 grams of carbon into the atmosphere. And the truth is, we are charging forward with AI. There's AI being used for everything. So in our survey, we listed a whole bunch of things from creative versioning, targeting, insight, a whole variety of different things that are going to be important to marketers. And you can see that across all of them, marketers are planning to spend more, to invest more, to do more. So the amount of investment in AI is only growing, and it's growing across all kinds of things. How concerned are they about the impact on climate change? Truth is, not much. So we asked marketers, how, in your media buying in the coming year, how much of a factor will sustainability be? How concerned are you about sustainability when you go out and do your media buying? And as you can see, 21% said it's highly unlikely that it will have any effect. Another 18% said, yeah, probably not much. Only 7% said that it was very likely that sustainability would be a factor in their decision making. So clearly, not a lot of concern in that area, and that's something that will build. There will be consumer reactions, regulators, there's going to be a lot of pressure coming in 2025 that will build up on this. So what can be done? Well, there's no magic wand. I think AI is very important. The promise of AI is very compelling. Everybody from content creators to distributors to media companies are going to continue to invest in it because of competition, because of fear that the other guy is going to do it. So the question is, what can you do? And perhaps one solution is to use AI to make the advertising business more efficient. And that means more efficient targeting, identifying your targets better, and so less wastage, less spray and pray in terms of advertising, and that'll reduce the energy. Also in terms of versioning and creation of the creatives, the production process, can you make that more efficient and cut the energy usage that way? Efficient selection, and this is perhaps the most obvious and the most important, is how can we find ways to pick better, more sustainable options? And that could be using more specific LLMs rather than the most powerful ones. It could mean choosing media channels that are more sustainable, more energy efficient, and reliant on clean energy. And then lastly, cutting wastage. So ad fraud doesn't just, the 80 billion or so that is spent in ad fraud worldwide, is not just about saving the investment and saving the money. There's also an opportunity to save energy and to have an impact, a positive impact on the environment. So AI could potentially be a tool to fix the problems created by AI. Right, last and final trend. This one's a bit different. So we're talking about the age of atomization. Now, atomization basically means the breaking down of something into its individual atoms. And we're sort of seeing the same thing with society. People are breaking down their lives from being part of society, from being more social, into more individual, solitary social lives. People are going out more, they're living alone more, they're living alone for longer, they're interacting with other people less, communities are becoming smaller, or they're spending less time with communities, they're eating on their own, they're entertaining on their own, they're traveling on their own. So in a lot of cases, the percentage of time spent on their own is increasing for people. And this is a fast-growing segment. So 1 in every 5 households in the world actually has one person. They're single-person households. And this is the fastest-growing segment around the world. Who's taking care of that? Which marketers are actually addressing them? So in our survey, 68%, so basically 7 out of every 10 marketers, were not thinking about this segment at all. They haven't addressed it at all. It's not showing up on their radar screen. And yet, it's actually a really valuable segment, and one that has very specific needs. So one of the things that this segment is extremely frustrated with is what they call the single-person penalty. And that's basically single people have to spend more because that's just how industry and brands and marketers are set up. So one assessment found that the average single person in the United Kingdom spends £500 more per month. It's like a tax for living alone. And it's not just groceries and household bills and rent, it's also things like travel, running a car, all sorts of expenses. And so there's a sort of penalty applied if you live alone. I mean, if you want a hotel room, typically there's a single person supplement. So across the board, they're being charged more, and they're extremely frustrated with it. And so any brand that starts to cater to that is going to have a pretty significant advantage. Again, 1 in 5 households, fastest growing household segment in the world. The other thing that's interesting about this group is that they're very flexible in their spending because they don't have to think about anybody else. If I don't like TV, I won't buy a TV. I won't subscribe to a Netflix service or whoever. If I'm fond of food, I spend a lot of money on food, but I don't spend on clothes. So it's very much up to the individual to build this kind of flexible spending program, which means that when you do spend, you have the capacity to spend a lot more. So for a brand that actually aligns well with the requirements of any of these households, they have the potential to gain very valuable customers. The other thing is that while they spend a lot of time on their own, they're actually quite open to companionship and community, but in areas that suit them and in quantities and frequency that suit them. So there is an opportunity for brands to get involved in communities, to build brand communities, to cater to these people. But the one thing to be very careful about is that they need to be very authentic and very caring. Because while atomization and loneliness are not the same thing, they're two separate things. You can be alone and not lonely. What's important is that there is an overlap. People who are living alone do have a higher propensity to be a part of what we call the loneliness epidemic. According to the US Surgeon General, that's a huge, huge concern for society. So as a brand, be careful to be authentic. Be careful not to come across as exploiting somebody like that. Great. That is largely what I wanted to talk about. Capitalizing on the economic reset is our first trend, and that's really saying marketers should be more proactive in 2025, try to take control of pricing in particular, understand the link between brand price and profitability, use customer insight, really understand your customers so that you have credibility in your organization and can start to influence and get more involved with all 4 Ps. Closing the experience gap, understand that a brand's perception is actually tied to the overall customer experience, not just marketing and promotion. Don't fall for the Dorman fallacy, introduce good friction, explore the concept of promise to the customer as an opportunity. Digital dilemma, battle between brand safety and brand safety and social media. Look for ways to lean into the age of abundance and help develop this new breed of sophisticated algorithmic planners. AI meets sustainability. Look for ways to find efficiency from AI across the advertising process and marketing process. Age of atomization, identify these customers, understand their needs, eliminate the single-person penalty, and start to cater to these customers. That's it from me. Thank you very much. If you are interested in a sample version of the report, please use the QR code.